I mean, if the good people of Goodreads rate these, who am I to say no? Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today I am taking you through all of the books that have a 4+ rating on Goodreads that I absolutely agree with. I have seen this video done a couple of times. It's absolutely not an original thought. I saw this done by Bree from Four Paws in a Book. I've seen it from Casiidy from Covers of Casiidy, and I thought that it was such a great way to really take a look at what the ratings on Goodreads are like. Because Goodreads is so user-focused, all of the ratings are basically coming from what people have read, but the ratings can be quite subjective. For example, a book that you gave a 5-star, somebody else might have given it a 1-star, and they might have similar reasons for having given it the 1-star that you gave it for a 5-star. So I think go into this with a bit of an open mind, in that while I'm saying these definitely deserve a 4 or higher rating on Goodreads, they might not be your favorite book, but they are definitely some of mine. Up first is Emily Henry's Funny Story. This is the best book that Emily Henry has written so far, and I will absolutely put my house on saying that. This is about Daphne and Miles, who are brought together as roommates when their respective partners, Peter and Petra, get together, having been childhood friends and having grown up beside one another, but have fallen in love with each other over the years. It turns out that Peter and Petra are going to get married in a very whirlwind romance, but Daphne and Miles decide that they're going to take matters into their own hands. They've been given an invite to the wedding, and they are going to turn up to it as a couple. I absolutely love the fake dating aspect to it, because it's something that definitely has a reason why you would fake date someone. But I also just loved the characters. I loved the story of kind of finding yourself after a breakup, especially when it's in an area that you are not native to. It's somewhere that you had moved to probably for your partner. It's something that is quite personal to me, and I thought it was written so well in this book. I also have to give a shout out to Miles Novak, who is basically Nick Miller from New Girl, but put on the pages of a book. I absolutely love reading about him. He is chaotic. He's a little bit quirky. He's a little bit insane, but he absolutely warmed my heart anytime I picked this book up. Next up is Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. This book also has such an interesting concept. It's set in the quite near future, and it takes the idea of racism and puts it on its head. Instead of in our world, where white people are the oppressors and people of colour are the oppressed, the narrative is switched here. In this world, people of colour are the oppressors and white people are the oppressed ones. In Noughts and Crosses, you are following Caleb and Sephi, who have been friends ever since they were young. Sephi is black, so she is a nought, and Caleb is white, so he's a cross. But they have fallen in love with each other. They were childhood best friends. They haven't really seen each other in a couple of years, but when they're reunited, feelings really start to ignite between the two, and this turns into quite a big star-crossed lovers narrative. I was absolutely hooked on this one. I think it's the perfect start to the series, and it's one of my favourite YA series of all time. It's something that I definitely recommend to people who are looking for a little bit of dystopia, something a little bit darker, and I would absolutely recommend that you go and pick it up. I have personally stopped rating non-fiction books because I don't think it is fair to put a star rating or to put a number value on somebody's lived experience. But a non-fiction book that I would absolutely recommend right to the end of the world and back is A Heart That Works by Rob Delaney. Rob is a comedian. He's from the US, but he has been living in the UK for the last decade or maybe 20 years or so. He and his wife Leah are parents to 4 children, 3 of whom are still living. About a month before his first birthday, Henry, who was their second to youngest child, was diagnosed with a brain tumour and ended up losing his life to cancer shortly after his second birthday. This whole book is like a stomach punch. It is emotionally gutting. It does follow quite intensely Henry's story with his diagnosis, of how he was being cared for by the people in the NHS, especially with his family, and it's so heartbreaking to read. It is completely devastating to read about parents who've lost a child, but to read about them having lost a child in such circumstances and at such a young age is completely heart-wrenching. However, it's written so beautifully, and it is not just written as a celebration of Henry's life, but also as a celebration of the people who've worked with the NHS and who took care of Henry during his illness. And it's such a stunning read. I know it can be a really difficult topic to read, especially for parents, especially for people who have gone through similar situations. But if it is something that you are able to read, I would absolutely recommend that you pick it up. A slightly happier read is the entire Heartstoppers series by Alice Oseman. This entire series has an over 4-star rating, every single one of the 5 books so far, and there's good reason for that. These books are like a hug for you. They are absolutely heartwarming. They're so gentle and loving and welcoming. These books follow Nick and Charlie, who are 2 young boys in their last and second to last year of secondary school. Nick and Charlie meet each other while they are playing rugby together, and feelings start to evolve between the 2 of them. Charlie has been out as gay in his school for a couple of years, but Nick is starting to come to terms with his sexuality and what that means for him, and starting to tell people in his life that he's queer. I absolutely adore this entire series. This is the 3rd one, which is my absolute favourite so far. It takes place on a school trip to Paris, and it features 2 teachers who start to get on a little bit better than they were at the beginning of this book. I absolutely love this series, and I've also completely fallen in love with the Netflix adaptation. I know that there is another series of that coming out at the beginning of 2025, and I am already on tenterhooks for it. When you have proclaimed a book one of your favorites, it's always a little bit of a moment when you go back and reread it. There's that little situation of, do I still love this book? Is it really going to hold up to what I've thought before? Evelyn Hugo absolutely did. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is still one of my favourite books of all time, even after a reread last year. As is evident from the title, this is about Evelyn Hugo, who was a huge Hollywood starlet back in the 50s and 60s, but she has been kind of a recluse for the last couple of years. Evelyn, however, has invited Monique, a young journalist, to come and sit with her, and Monique is going to hear everything about Evelyn's life, including something she's never spoken about before, her marriage to her 7 different husbands. Throughout her interview, Monique finds out everything about Evelyn's relationships and her marriages, and the person with whom Evelyn was really in love with. I absolutely love this book. I did know what was going to happen in it, obviously, the second time that I read it around, so I could concentrate on how beautifully written it was, and just how much it gripped me into the story, even while I knew what was coming, and I think that that is a hallmark of a really well-written book. Another favourite of mine that I went back to recently and did have kind of the same qualms was The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. The story of me and the Book Thief is slightly different to how it was with Evelyn Hugo. I read this first when I was about 19 years old. I was just doing my leaving cert, so I was in my final year of school, and I loved this story so much. It completely broke my heart in 2, especially the last couple of chapters and the last couple of pages. This book is set in Germany during World War II, and it is actually narrated by Death, who, as you can imagine, is having quite a busy period in his life at the moment. The last time that I read this was during the Amazing Readathon back in June, and I came to it in a very different position in life. When I read it that time, I was turning 32 at the end of the month, and I was actually living in Germany. As you can imagine, this put a slightly different spin on everything, that I was now living in the country where everything had been happening. So I had been experiencing things that Germany are doing to remember victims of the Holocaust and remember victims of World War II. Having that slightly different experience with this book really just opened it all up again, and I think I connected with it on an even stronger level this time and cried my eyes out even harder this time. If an author is good enough to appear on this list twice, then you know that they've hit a good mark here. And the first book of Friedrich Bachmann's that I'm going to recommend from this list is A Man Called Uwe. You might know this one in a slightly different name because there is an adaptation with Tom Hanks called A Man Called Otto. But the story and the situations are completely the same in the book, and it is just as heartbreaking and just as heart-wrenching. The book follows Uwe, who is an old man living in Sweden. He's been widowed for quite some time, and he's basically had enough. Uwe has decided that he is going to end his life and that he is going to join his wife in the afterlife. But every single time that he tries to end his own life, things get in the way and basically shows him that he needs to stick around for a little bit longer. A new family moves into a home very close to his, and he starts to really connect with these 2 young children that they are bringing along. Uwe has always been seen by the community as somebody who's very old, very curmudgeonly, very stubborn, and really difficult to talk to. But these 2 young girls just break down every single barrier that he has, and it is so heartwarming to see him really open up to them and to open up to experiencing a totally different kind of love in his life. But for me, Friedrich Bachmann's Magnus Opus is Beartown. This is one of the best books that I've ever read, but it took me 2 attempts to try and read it. I first tried to read this in July 2020 or so, when I think I just wasn't in the right situation. The sun was absolutely splitting it down, and I feel like this needed to be a cold weather, cozying up on the couch book. I'm kind of glad that I left it to the darker days of winter, because this is a much darker book than that. This book is set in Beartown, a fictional town in northern Sweden where hockey is the absolute way of life. Everybody follows the hockey team. The young boys on the hockey team are treated as gods by the community. But at a party one evening after they have won a championship game, things really start to get out of hand, and one of the boys on the hockey team sexually assaults a woman in the community. This turns into an entire witch hunt. What she said versus what he said. What happened versus what people think happened. And everybody turns against everybody else. And neighbor is turning against neighbor. Sometimes brother is turning against brother. It's so heartbreaking to read this, but it is such an important and such an impactful book that I genuinely think everybody out there deserves to read it. I have still got the second and the third books on my Kindle because they are quite chunky. This one is about 450 or so pages, but The Winners, the third book in this series, is about 680 pages long. It's definitely the kind of book that I will need to be in the mood for, not just because of the length, but also because of the subject matter. But I just know that when I go and pick this up, I will be completely blown away by it. If you want to keep the vibes darker, maybe with a thriller vibe, then I would absolutely recommend that you go and pick up Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent. This was my 100% top choice book of the year in 2023. I was spellbound by it. This book follows Sally Diamond, who has always been seen as a little bit strange by everybody in her community. She's had a little bit of trouble understanding some things, so when her father tells her that when he passes away, he just wants to be brought out with the rubbish, that's pretty much exactly what Sally does. She brings her father's remains to the farm's incinerator and is almost at the point of pushing the button when things are found out. Sally's quirky habits catch the eye of the national media in Ireland, and her story really starts to gain legs. It doesn't just stay in Ireland, and we don't just find out some stories about Sally's birth mother, but also we find out some more about Sally's birth father and the places that he went to and the things that he had done to try and escape some of his actions in the past. This book really takes you the whole way across the world and back, and I was completely spellbound, but also confuddled by everything that was happening in this book. If I had to describe it as this book meets this book, it would be kind of like if Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine and if Room by Emma Donoghue had a baby. This is the kind of vibe that this book is giving out, so if you enjoyed those two books, I think Sally Diamond might be someone for you. Another thriller that I recommend, and one that was in my top 5 books of 2023, is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This is the first book of Lisa Jewell's that I have read, and I have been told that this is her best one, so I'm kind of expecting it all to go down from there. This is following Alex and Josie. They meet each other on a night out when they are both celebrating their respective birthdays. But Josie has heard about Alex because she has got a podcast where she's kind of talking to people about how they have changed their lives and the things that they have done to make their lives a little bit better. Josie decides that she's going to appear on Alex's podcast with the idea that the two of them being birthday twins, how do the circumstances of your birth and the circumstances of where you grow up, how does that change you as a person when you're an adult? Well, that's the pretense that Josie goes into this podcast about. But what she actually tells Alex is a completely different story, and it takes you a whole different direction that I definitely wasn't expecting. I was completely hooked on this. I listened to the entire audiobook, I think within one day, maybe a little bit carried over into the next one. And I would actually recommend it most as an audiobook because it's really immersive. If the characters are chatting in a cafe, you can hear cafe noises in the background. If somebody is sitting at the fireplace, you can hear fire crackling. Or if they're in a park, you can hear children laughing, or you can hear a dog barking in the background. I thought that it was so well done and so immersive that I genuinely think that's what added to my enjoyment of this book. One of my favourite authors of all time is Marian Keyes, and many of her books also have got an over 4-star rating on Goodreads, but the one that I most stand behind is Rachel's Holiday. This was my all-time hands down favourite Marian Keyes book of the entire bunch. This is following Rachel, who has been living kind of a high-octane life in New York, when she is found unresponsive in her apartment one day and with a note that looks suspiciously like a suicide note. Her parents are called and bring her back to Ireland. Rachel thinks that she has been booked into the cloisters, a 6-week retreat at a spa where she's going to be waited on hand and foot. What she's actually been booked into is the cloisters, a 6-week rehab program. And here she's going to go to daily therapy sessions, she's going to go to group therapy, and she's going to lay her demons out on the table. This isn't something that Rachel is fully on board with at the beginning of the novel, but you can really see the change in her demeanor and the change in her mindset as you go through the book. Something that I also love about this, though, is the other people who go to group therapy in Rachel's session. You've got somebody who is a kleptomaniac, you've got people who are struggling with addiction to alcohol or with drugs, and you've also got somebody who has spent the entirety of his life alone and is just now coming to terms with who he really is. I absolutely loved spending all of my time with this cast of characters, and I absolutely loved, again, Rachel as well. I know that Marion is kind of expanding the Walsh sister universe a little bit, and I'm so excited to go back and visit them in the next installment. If, like me, you're a pop fiction girly who really needs to find out everything about the books that they've read or about the shows or the movies that they've watched, then I would absolutely recommend Love That Journey for Me by Dr. Emily Garside. This is a little bit of a deep dive into the phenomenon that is Schitt's Creek. It kind of came on the scene to very little fanfare back in 2015, 2016. But when the world shut down in 2020, people were looking to the screen for comfort and for some support. And people found Schitt's Creek in their droves. It became a phenomenon practically overnight, and it catapulted Dan Levy and Annie Murphy into fame. Dr. Emily Garside takes a look at every single season, season by season, episode by episode, and takes a look at the relationships that are in this book, be they familial or romantic or platonic, and I absolutely loved it. I know as well that she has got a book specifically about David and Patrick's relationship named You Are My Happy Ending that has been on my sites for such a long time, but I just haven't been able to find a copy of it. But I just know that as soon as I pick that one up, it's going to reignite that little passionate spark that I have for Schitt's Creek, and I am going to cross waters to try and find a way to watch Schitt's Creek online. Finally, if celebrity memoirs are your thing, then one of the best that I have ever read, ever, is Taste by Stanley Tucci. This is part memoir, part recipe book. There are a couple of recipes in here that Stanley will have cooked and perfected with his family over the years, but the majority of this book is actually a look back at Stanley's life, at his childhood as the child of Italian immigrants into America, his marriage to his first wife, and her struggle with cancer and her eventually passing from the disease, him finding love a second time and getting married to the sister of one of his co-stars. And what I really loved about this book is just how much you can feel Stanley's voice coming through on the pages. It really does feel like a book that was written by Stanley Tucci. It has so much heart and it has so much humor, but also so much suave and sophistication throughout every single page. Something that I truly loved about this book is that you see how much of a celebration food is in his life. It also does chronicle some of Stanley's own personal journey with cancer when he was diagnosed with throat and tongue cancer back in, I think, 2015 or 2016. And this had a huge impact on his life because he lost quite a lot of his sense of taste and his sense of smell. These are two hugely important senses when you are dealing with food and with cooking. You can imagine how much this changed Stanley's relationship with food and with eating, but you can also see him rallying around and getting back to feeling more like himself. I love Stanley Tucci so much. He is the only man who will be allowed to survive when women take over the world, and I absolutely implore you to go and check this memoir out. Those are just some of the books that I definitely think deserve the 4-star plus rating on Goodreads that they have. Are there any books that you think deserve an over 4-star rating on Goodreads, even if they are a little bit under the radar and we don't particularly know about them? If you'd love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me a star emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.